Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Friday, which means it's time for a new how to bass tutorial. And today I'm going to show you how to make this sound. And actually, what you're looking at right now is the whole thing. This is just this Sytrus with no post-processing whatsoever. And fun fact about this coming out on Friday, I didn't make this on Friday. I scheduled it to come out on Friday just so we could be a little nostalgic a bit, right? Who knows? Maybe I'll keep it up. Anyway, at least lately, long story short, I've had some access to some hardware and have been using some fun things to do some fun things, and have learned some things about the advantages and disadvantages of particular hardware and software. And in that case, I've also tried to then take those things I learned from the hardware to see if I can apply them in the software. It turns out you totally can. And in this example, I'm doing something that I've done with the Arturia Matrix Brute, which has something where you can make a triangle wave and then do something called metalize to it, which wavefolds it in a particular way that like keeps its power, but tends to have a kind of extra high frequency tinge to it. And that's kind of what I did here. I drove this up and just kind of all up and down it. And the purpose of this is to generate a bit of high frequency content that you then FM at high frequency. And this is still the same note. And this one actually is being pitched, like manipulated up and down and whatnot, but right now it's going down. And the reason why this is happening is because I'm essentially FMing it by a saw wave, but with interesting intention. Because what I'm trying to do here is I want oscillator sync. And actual oscillator sync restarts the waveform when the other one's period restarts. It has nothing to do with the actual shape of the waveform that the oscillator is being synced to. It has everything to do with the period of its pitch information. So if you FM it, it makes it start faster or slower, but it doesn't. If it has more harmonics, that doesn't actually mean anything. But in FM in the digital world, and for this version of FM, it means a lot, because what's actually happening is that this isn't direct FM anyway. So not only are we not doing this with real oscillator sync, we also aren't doing this with real FM. And what exactly are we getting out of oscillator sync? Well, it's mostly just that we're able to jam up and down the higher frequency things without having to worry about too much damage on its motion, because it's guaranteed to restart in time no matter what. And essentially FM gets us that result no matter what anyway, because we're just changing the phase over time. I was attempting to figure out what exactly that, like how that could really work, and I didn't really figure one out. But this shape that is something I got while I was experimenting. But the same sort of ultimate result is something. I guess this does nothing. But what's happening here is that because this is kind of always changing as like a half sine, like almost a quarter actual. This is a quarter sine experience. Because it's like always changing, that means that the phase is always changing, so that the pitch is always changing, which is essentially what an actual saw wave FM is with actual analog FM, which is what I attempted to get out of this shape. And as a result, no matter what's happening with this waveform, it'll still kind of sound like it's this note, because there's a constant phase change that's restarting every oscillation. So we're getting the value of oscillator sync, but we're not really getting oscillator sync, is long story short. So what I've done here, I'm using 5 voices before that happened, and before this distortion that occurred here, because I'm using it to get a lot of harmonic activity out of it, but it's still pretty even without it. Let me turn the 5 voices back on. The XY controls, X is controlling number 1's pitch, and Y is controlling how hard this thing is FMing. If FM's all the way off, then actually this is X. Let's just make this visually smarter. Yeah, cool. So if this one's all the way down, what that'll mean is that we're hearing just the negative whatever this tone is, and if that, I mean, I'm keeping it low because that's where the most interesting results were. In Matrix Brute land, the value of this was that you basically made a high frequency event happen, but then kept it at a low formant. It became an interesting that kind of thing. That's not at all how this worked out with FM. But one of the other benefits of analog stuff, actually, I don't even think I mentioned this one, the first one. The main primary benefit of analogs is that it doesn't alias. It has nothing to do, it doesn't care at all about what sample rate, it doesn't do any of that stuff. And in sample rate universe, that means that when we FM stuff that has already high frequencies fast enough, that means that it's going to generate very high frequencies, and that creates a lot of aliasing. So for example, this is what this sounds like, together with the distortion on, and this is just this shape. Here's what it sounds like without the anti-aliasing. I'm distorting it, so a certain amount of crackling is happening, but the whole, it's not actually the whole thing, but the sort of secret sauce of analog stuff that makes it a viable and valuable thing is essentially that it does what amounts to being high CPU processing, essentially for free. And not free as in you don't pay for it, free as in it had no cost to time and no cost to harmonic fidelity. And especially when it comes to something like FM, when you come up with a fun thing that's all harmonic and nice, it doesn't matter how high frequency or hard you're putting it, all the harmonics that are being generated are relative and relevant and related. They're being generated. And that feels a way. And if you've been keeping up with the video track reviews, you've heard me talk about how lower frequency presence is a generation of high frequency phase cancellation. And something like a saw wave, the whole sharpness of it is essentially a big old cascading repetitive phase cancellation of all those harmonics all at once. And the rate of them, if they're perfect, they feel away. And if you mess with it even a little bit, it immediately loses that quality. Perfect in a digital sense is not as perfect in the analog sense. And it's not even really about hearing it in the air, because while I'm hearing an analog, maybe, well, we're going to hear the results of it when I eventually get to the videos and do with them, because oh boy am I. You're going to see that, you're going to hear them through YouTube, and it's going to get processed digitally, so the results still going to be fed to you through a digital creation. But the fact that the phase cohesiveness is perfect and basically up to whatever it can be generated by the infinite curve of energy has an impact that has ramifications all the way down the frequency scale to the fundamental harmonics, because they are all aligned, which means the value, the kind of fun you feel from a lower frequency when high frequencies are aligned in a certain way, is total. And that's a lot. That is something. That's so much. It's something I basically never noticed, but pretty much until I cared enough to actually look at something that is generated by hardware and use it to do things I do myself already. I did not notice how much noise is generated by aliasing in these processes. And on top of that, I also didn't notice how many things I avoided doing because I assumed they just generated trash. Things like very high frequency FM and digital stuff. Let's just open a random thing. I don't do a lot of FM with leads. I don't do a lot of complicated lead processing, period, actually. And that is basically entirely because of the reality of aliasing. And that the hard base is pretty much done, by the way. You can get the preset, the description of this video. The whole value of this is that the whole reason this is able to sound as good as it does is because I employed aliasing. Or anti-aliasing rather, and that basically gave it what amounts to being an analog quality, which is literally an increase in quality. And nowadays, it's basically a CPU thing. Doing this on just this one thing with nothing else is nothing. But if I had 20 and none and a bunch of voices and use it everywhere, because ultimately what anti-aliasing is, as we'll find out when I show you this example with the FM here, is that it'll run whatever you're doing at a higher sample rate. And what that will mean for your result is that it's able to do a thing where it puts a filter higher than what is regular Nyquist, which is half the sample rate you work in, and that which is the highest theoretical tone that you generate in a given sample rate. And then it prevents frequencies from going higher than that, interacting with it, and therefore not being a problem. And it's able to contain that increase in CPU processing to just the plugin, because of course you could just increase your sample rate all the way up and live that way. You can just live at 96 kilohertz, because it's not actually doubling or quadrupling. It's definitely not x64ing the sample rate. I don't know what the factor is a multiple of here, but I read somewhere what the numbers were, and that's also what these numbers mean up here too. But this is for audio recording quality, for samples, for when you have a thing like a hi-hat and you pitch it above Nyquist, which is pretty easy because that's noise, and noise is very high frequency. Point is, I have a lead, and you FM it by something very, if you do high frequency by high frequency, you get pretty much just pain and suffering. And that the degree to which it suffers is how high above Nyquist were things pushed. And I would have essentially just not done this ever, or any version of this, or tried to use it ever, because it's just not a clean or good sound. But in the analog world, you just do this constantly, and like it comes out a way that doesn't, like, we're always talking about rolling off on the highs so as not to be an issue, but like with the analog stuff, you don't really have to do that. You just let them go because they're not even rolled. They're just cut by the nature of the recording captures, like, coding and coding. I don't even know much about the ADDA portion of it. You know what I mean? Point is, though, is that when you see this horror and sadness kind of show up, in fact, we're going to mute this channel so we don't have to listen to it anymore. Woo! Yeah. Like, these are both the same. Let's make them harmonic, right? Like, this is a harmonic multiple of a tone. It shouldn't be moving. And the reason why it is because when an aliased frequency attempts to interact with Nyquist by passing it, instead of actually passing it or going away, it loops back. So, like, if I tried to play something that's 10 kilohertz above Nyquist, it'll actually come back out 10 kilohertz below Nyquist, and it will not be a multiple of the fundamental anymore. And that is what all this nastiness we're looking at is. And how far it is below it all is how far above Nyquist it all got pushed. And you'll see that it'll require a couple of factors of anti-aliasing to really get rid of it all. And certain amounts of FM, like, well, oh my God, look how clean it looks. Certain amounts of FM will require a lot. And look, I'm using one voice to do one thing right now, and I'm using 9% CPU just to do this. This is a pretty intense procedure. But for hardware, it's nothing. This is nothing at all. Just for, like, slamming, not even talking about, like, digital things or, like, a DX7 or whatever, but, like, just analog to put some oscillators together, FM them together, and then whatever harmonics show up are going to be multiples of the two oscillators. Guaranteed. It's, and that's true for all the other processes that do lots of damage by, like, distorting and things. Distortion is a property that multiplies harmonics and stuff like that. And in this example of our base here, the distortion algorithm, fortunately, is included inside the oversampling capacity. Inside FL, if you were to just have an outside whatever distortion unit, it has also built into it wave shaping, or rather anti-aliasing. The wave shaper has built-in anti-aliasing. And pretty much whatever you want to find that as a thing in stuff that does these particular processes. And other plugins will have lots of ways of mitigating this. FL is lots about, like, individual focus on these things. It's also present in Maximus, by the way, because it's capable of operating at audio rate, and therefore it sometimes has to care about that kind of thing. It just has an oversample setting. And yeah, what else? Like, Harmer does not have one of those, but it does have a kind of this precision business, and this is more to do with what this stuff does. It tends to make it feel higher frequency when you turn it on all the way up if you're using distortion, but if you're not using distortion, the harmonics generated out of just the additive portion of it do not exceed the frequencies ever. So it's anti-aliased by nature. That's the part of the additive sort of deal. But with something like this that's function generated, which is primarily what these are, they're usually, like, they have this band limit option up here. And what happens is that these guys are just putting out a number that's a function, and it can exceed or not Nyquist depending on how hard we push it. You saw what happened with that other dude. And what band limiting does is when you play a note, it's actually generating an additive copy of it, because that's something that Sytrus can do. It can do one of these, like, convert to and then da-da. But the value of it then, when having done that, is that it'll just not generate a frequency, kind of like Harmer does, but it does it at a lot closer to Nyquist than Harmer does. Harmer does it at like 15K or something, or 17K. But if you were to pitch shift the note and bring it down, you could actually see it like a big, really hard low pass cut. Like it was like a shelf, like the sharpest shelf you've ever seen, because it actually just didn't play those harmonics. But when you pitch shift down on a normal note, actually their harmonics are there because they were generated. Isn't that something? So that's the whole basic kit and caboodle of this entire how to bass right now, is to show that if you do want to do analog-esque, like, experiences, it's just about filing on aliasing and anti-aliasing and going ham on high frequencies and high values. Other plugins like Sytrus, Serum, that do that by nature, because wavetables are a lot of high frequencies and you can FM together, and that's high on high. Oh boy, it does actually have quality settings. And it's very good. I have no idea how it calculates what it calculates to do what it does, but it does, and it's good. And you notice how it says like draft and whatnot, and I am assuming that on render stuff, I don't know how this determines whether or not it does it on render, but you might have noticed on Sytrus that there's that up here. I'm also using the EQ on this one. This is if I ever make like one of these, like it's just this one's no post. I actually do post, but it's because it actually has the EQ built into the thing. Isn't that cool? Yeah. So yeah, you can get analog results out of digital things if you account for being cleaner, being higher focused on anti-aliasing, and that's really the biggest thing that separates it. There's a bunch of other really specific things that separate it, but if you figure out what they are, you could just do them. You could just make a thing have random. You can make a thing have pitch drift. You can make a thing like be attitude already. You can make a thing like I did the shape to mimic what real saw wave FM. Like there's ways to mitigate what stuff is, but the very first step is that you have to be able to represent the high frequency processes, because that's what makes the hardware shine. And it's really freaky, like stuff that I would just not try to do, have not tried to do. I just have been fine with, because that was my world before I really got into like doing hardware stuff. Like I've been messing around with the modular things, whatever, and that's been primarily like monophonic, fun bass processing stuff. And bass processing is not very high frequency, so I don't even before all this. That's probably primarily why I didn't really run into this problem very often. But I started using. I have a couple. I have a right now. All right, just to give you a list of stuff that's coming. I have an Arturia Micro Freak, a Arturia Matrix Brute, an Arturia Drum Brute, and a Keystep Pro to bring it all together. And the Micro Freak is like a polysynth. It can play chords and junk. And just playing naked chords on it sounds and feels better. And people have that response to hardware all the time. That just basic stuff feels better. And the Drum Brute, this is the one that's hilarious to me, because it's an analog drum machine, and it's a generative one, which is it doesn't have samples. It's literally generating these things synthetically, or whatever, however way it does whatever it does. But the point is that it's as dry, pure circuitry as you can be. Has a sequencer of stuff in it, but I don't even care, like, because you can just trigger it by MIDI and it has individual outputs, right? So just making a regular drum beat on that has more power in it more easily and just more better survives things like EQing and compression, because of how ridiculously tight and together the phase stuff is, because absolutely all of it is clean. And it's a little frightening how easy it is to get to certain positions with it. And it's not to say, again, it's not to say that you can't. I could just record those samples and do that, and then you too can do that too. Like, that's all well and good. But it's just that you just have to know this about these things. You have to know that that's why that is. Because I've been hacking it back and forth for decade, I guess, to try and get like certain kinds of textures and feelings out of things that with hardware you just have. It just is. That's the way it is. But like. Messing around with this guy, right? I have 5 voices of unison on this. That is a freakish digital luxury. Like, even the polysynth, like, I'm going to get my hands on a bunch of other stuff, and I'm going to tell you why when the videos start coming, but the reality of hardware synths is that, like, yeah, you can get some serious stuff out of it, but, like, you better be basically the people making these packs for, like, or just have the money to basically play and have toys, because it's the digital stuff will always be more practical, no matter any of the crap I just said. Like, it is still, like, because 5 voices unison is just 5xing whatever thing you're doing. And what I was talking about having done all this with the Matrix Brute. The Matrix Brute can't do that. It's a monosynth. And that limits it, but it also, like, is why it's powerful. So there's different tools for different things, and it puts you just in different starting positions in terms of a lot of different stuff. Like, in the digital universe, you got to clean it up first, and then you got to plan ahead, and then you can do all of it, and then you can write it up stuff, but then you can have a billion things, and you can have literally every kind of cover, every individual problem, solution, and solvature you need to have for everything, and then you're fine. Versus the analog stuff, where you really have to be fine with what you have in a lot of situations. Like the Drum Brute. It's really lucky that a lot of that stuff I said is true about it, because it's just not a whole hell of a lot that you can change about it. And that'll be something to talk about in the video for it. But like that in the digital universe. I can have, if I could have everything I ever want, what do I have? But I can't. I can still have everything I want. I could even have this in there after a fact, but that's the thing. You got to plan it from that angle, but you can. Long story short, analog and digital might not be better one way or the other, but there is reasons why analog is like a technical superiority in a very basic sense that should be cared about in digital processing, and can. Hope that came across. Anyway, if you would like to download this preset, it will be available in the description of this video. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.